So welcome to Queensland, right? And, I think we should start off with your military career, your distinguished career. And I wonder what the military, how the military looks at climate change and soil and water security. Is it a bigger issue than just being able to eat?
Well, I think one of the, first of all, ladies and gentlemen, boys and girls, it's terrific to be here, and can I congratulate the students on their superb conduct of this evening. I could only answer 10% of the questions, so I failed, but never mind. And also the quality of the dinner tonight, I thought it was terrific, and can I congratulate Soils Science Queensland and Corinda Senior State for orchestrating this function tonight. The question really relates to, I guess, the military thinking on soil. Well, what I've been trying to do as an old soldier is to get through to our own military chiefs of staff and Department of Defence, and indeed to the United States Chiefs of Staff, because one's met with a little bit, some of them in recent times, to say that they should be putting more emphasis into the real security issues that are going to confront this planet when we have to try and feed 10 million people by 2050, when we're losing arable land at the rate of about 1% per year, when many of the soils of India, China, Africa and the Middle East are degrading rapidly, as is their water sources from underground aquifers, and where we've been doing some rather bad things on the soil across the planet really, in terms of trying to increase production and so on. Now the end issue, I think, is that if we don't fix the soil quickly, we're going to find many, many millions of people, tens, maybe hundreds, maybe a billion, I don't know, who are not going to have enough food to eat, and certainly enough water for the irrigation, and probably not enough clean water to drink. And that is the first condition for developing insecurity in any region. If you're hungry, you fight. And the Egyptian riots in the Arab Spring a few years ago were about the rise in food prices, not about the sanction of President Mubarak. So to answer your question, I think the defence organisations really have to look at food security issues as an important component of how they're going to face future conflict. The second aspect is, being an old soldier, I think the military application of the logic thinking process of dealing with problems could be usefully applied in this whole food security business.
I read about 2009, the stocking rate of humans on Earth was about 40% greater than our current capacity, and in 2013 it's 50% higher in terms of use of our resources. And water is, I think, one of the ones that's getting scarcest, fastest, and even probably more so than soils.
Well, I think that's true. You've got to, I think your figures are pretty right, because even today, with 2 or 3 billion people on whatever it is, $2 or $3 a day, just to maintain current standards of living as they are, it's about a planet and a half worth of resources we're using already. If this current 7 billion all aspire to Australian standards of living, you need about 4 planets. And if you aspire to American standards of living, we need about 5 planets or thereabouts. And when we go to 10 billion people, all will be looking at little things that you kids operate, so that everybody knows what's happening everywhere. You're going to create great angst and anxieties with those communities that are living in substandard areas of productivity. And the 10 billion, I think, is going to be very hard asked to support in a sustainable way, unless we move now to fix the soil. Fixing the soil is the key requirement. The key strategic requirement is to restore the health of our global landscape so that it's fit for purpose, so it's fit for agriculture, fit for mining, fit for urban, fit for leisure. And by being fit for it means you've got to keep the soil up to a suitable standard.
As Australia's advocate for soils, I believe you were in the States recently, what did you pick up there about their attitude to soils and sustainability and water and so on in your discussions there?
Well, it was interesting because the United States Department of Agriculture is, they've got a million farmers, I think, as against our 130,000 farmers. But their department, I think, is far more attuned to rewarding farmers on a two-way basis. Firstly, to pay them a fair price for their food, and that's a very interesting question that we've all got to come to grips with. And secondly, they reward them for looking after the health of their soils. Now in Australia, we've got 135,000 farmers looking after 60% of the Australian landscape on behalf of 23 million urban Australians, you and me. Is it fair to expect those 135,000 farmers to put all their time, energy and resources into looking after half the Australian landscape without adequate support from you and me? I don't think it is. And I call it reconnecting urban Australia with its rural roots. And the best way to do that is to, as I say, reward farmers for those two things. But the second best way is to do what you're doing here in your own high school. And that is to put a garden, a school garden, in every primary school and hopefully every secondary school in the country, but with a proper syllabus of education, so that by the time a kid goes through from 6 to 15 or 16, by the end of that period, he or she will have a good understanding of the mechanics of how the soil functions in its microbial, fungal, mineral, bacterial sense, how it functions or it can only function if the hydrology is right, and how it can only function if you've got the right mix of plants. And the three of them have got to be managed together: soil, water and plants. If you just look after one and you ignore the other two, you fail. If you look after two and ignore the other one, you fail. And that to me is one of the big issues we have in the country: how to get this need or this message across to everyone that it is in integrating the management of those three aspects that is absolutely key. That is one of the things that a fellow called Peter Andrews talks about, and you may have seen him on Australian Story. So that's important, and you can teach all of that in the school garden. You can teach about photosynthesis, you can teach transpiration, you can teach engineering, you can teach art, you can teach literature, you can teach maths, all around that school garden, if you've got the right syllabus. So your school garden is very important, and I hope in 10 years' time we'll have one with a real good syllabus in every school in the country.
You mentioned that Australian farmers and the people that produce our food probably need some more support. And I have a view that the Australian population has never starved, and therefore it doesn't really want to pay the real value of food. And as a result, what's happened is we've actually been mining Australian agriculture for the last 200 years. And one way to actually redress that balance is through carbon trading, for example, to get carbon back into our soils and then have the general population supporting carbon credits. And recently in the ERF, soil carbon got recognised for the first time, and there was about 3.5 million tonnes of carbon dioxide sold from soil carbon credits. Is that a useful start in the way we start redressing some of that cash flow from urban back into rural communities?
Well, I think it's a very good thing to encourage anyone, backyard gardeners, etc., to put more soil carbon back into their soil. Because carbon, I think if you had to have a basic measuring tool for soil health, carbon is not a bad indicator. It's not the total, but it's not bad. Generally speaking, if your carbon levels in soil are going up, you can say generally that your soil health is going up. The truth of the matter, in Australia, with our 39 different soil types, we've only got about 4 of them where our carbon levels are going up. And that's why we're suffering from all sorts of issues, and talk about that in a minute. So it's how to encourage farmers to, and anybody to do with the land catchments, indigenous and so on, mining companies, to do their best to put more carbon back into the soil. Now the government's trying the emissions reduction funding scheme, and I think the umpire's out on that, but it appears to have been successful in its first effort. And I guess we'll have to see how it plays out. If there's $1 in it for a farmer, if it's easy for him to apply for, if the measuring system is consistent in terms of carbon measurement, and that's still a little bit tricky, then it'll probably be a very good thing. But I do want to emphasise the importance of carbon, because soil carbon really is one of the keys to holding water in the soil. For every gram of carbon, soil carbon you've got in the soil, you can hold about up to 8 grams of water, and vice versa. So if you're losing carbon, you're losing water holding capacity. And in this country, which very, very few people talk about when it comes to water, if you look at your tables or a map of Australia and 100 drops of rainfall on a given year, only 2 of those drops end up in all the dams that we've got in this country. 10 drops end up in all our rivers. 2 drops roll off the roads and the roofs. That's 14%. And that's what we all look at. How much water we got in our dams? Let's build more dams. How much water we got in the river? What are we going to do about issuing permits? We ignore largely the other 86%, of which 50%, half of our rainfall, is going up there because it cannot filtrate the soil, or it runs off, again, because there's nothing on the surface of the soil to hold it. So in my view, we've got to really look at retaining more moisture, more rainfall that falls on the landscape. And the way to do that, of course, is to have every square inch of your landscape, including in the cities, covered with green stuff, whether it's rose bushes or orange orchards or wheat or whatever, trees, forests, anything that's green and can pull down CO2 and can transpire water. Because people forget that perhaps 65%, nearly 70% of the rainfall that falls on the landmass comes through the small water cycle. That is, from the water that's drawn up by the plants and the trees, and then through transpiration through the leaves of the trees, is vaporised, condenses, and then drops again as local rain. That's called the small water cycle. Now, by and large, what we've been doing is destroying that small water cycle because we've cut down so much of our green stuff. And that is fatal. And then people say, well, build more dams. Well, the dams don't contribute very much to the small water cycle. They provide water in an emergency, and they evaporate straight into the atmosphere. They don't go through the roots of the tree, the plants and so on. So getting that small water cycle going is critical. To do that, you've got to have a healthy soil. To get a healthy soil, you've got to have green cover in a variety, not as a monoculture, and you've got to have carbon. They're the fundamentals. You've got to have other minerals and so on as well, but carbon is the key. So that's a long-winded answer to your question on ERA, but it's all linked in.
There's some pretty big issues that you're covering there. Do you think that we're getting attention at a policy level in Australia, and were you happy with the attention that soils and water and food security got in the agricultural white paper?
I think it's a mixed bag. Where I was encouraged was in the establishment of the appointment of the National Soil Advocate. That was done by Julie Gillard, been extended by Prime Minister Abbott. It's a pro bono appointment, it's an honorary appointment. I don't have any staff. I'm doing it by myself at the moment, but hopefully that will change before too long. But in terms of the agricultural white paper, I think you've got to give a tick in the sense that we've now got a white paper. We've got something to start with. If I'd have been writing it, I think I'd have started off on a chapter that if we want to have a good agricultural industry, the first key requirement is to make sure that the soil that is going to grow the food and the fibre is in good condition. And that has got to be the first move that we make in developing an agricultural industry, that everybody's on the same sheet of music in getting the soil restored and maintained to a healthy level. That didn't happen in that sense. But what did happen is in the paper they put emphasis on research, development and extension. And as the soil advocate, I think I can say I had a reasonable input into, first of all, trying to bring all the scientists, the soil science groups together. Because in this country we have a lot of good science, but it's penny packeted. I don't think anyone can tell me where the total knowledge of our soil science or our water science is. It's in all sorts of different groups, universities, ag colleges, farms and so on. And it seems to me that we've, firstly we've got to do a stock take of our knowledge base. What do we know about soil and water and plants and how they work together? And then from that look at our deficiencies in our knowledge base, and then direct the priorities in terms of where we want the science to go in meeting those knowledge deficiencies. Now, that's what I think the research and development extension strategy will hopefully achieve. And there are two aspects, I think, to this that are critically important, and this is what I'm trying to push as the soil advocate. If we're going to do it properly, we've got to look at the Australian continent as a total. Its river systems, its floodplains and its wetlands, its riparian zones. You might put priority in dealing with issues in the agricultural sector or the catchment sector, that's fine. But it is stupid just to look at one little segment of a river, or one little floodplain, or 3 or 4 wetlands. You've got to look at the totality and how this country operated before settlement of any type, be it Aboriginal or whatever, and then what has happened since settlement that's changed what was a very sophisticated and natural environment. And then somehow we've got to try and get a balance in meeting our agricultural production requirements with meeting the environmental requirements. And trying to bring back where it's possible the way our river systems used to flow, the rehydration of our wetlands, which are the kidneys of any river system. We filled about 80% of them in. On the floodplains, most of our creeks and rivers are now incised or excised, whatever the term is, but they flow below the floodplain, when before our river systems used to flow above the floodplains. And when you got a lot of water, it gently over the banks into the floodplain, and the floodplain held that water, and it held it there for the dry seasons and the droughts. That's how we had drought through Australia. And if there was more water, then it moved down to the next floodplain, the next floodplain. And the river systems were not continuous flows of water to the sea. They were in many cases interconnected lagoons, divided by reeds and grasses and so on. But we cut sways through those grass patches and reeds and so on for river transport, because we needed the river transport to get the wool and the wheat from our farms to the ports. So we did a fair bit of damage there unknowingly, but now we know what we've got to do, and what we've got to do is get a consolidated national plan on how to fix it all. And if I can probably preempt the next question. In my view, we've got to do two things in this country. First of all, we've got to have a plan for fixing the paddock. That is, to get every farmer and every land manager singing from the same sheet of music on how we restore and maintain the landscape so it's fit for purpose. And concurrent with that, we've got to fix the policy. And the problem with policy at the moment is it's being written in a stovepipe way. Agricultural departments put out their policy, mining put out their policy, environment put out their policy, regional development put out their policy. But the policy national policy on looking after our landscape should include the inputs from all those organisations, plus health, plus trade, plus national security, because they all have an interest and involvement in soil. And if we can get all of those departments in a political sense, federal and state, inputting into a national policy to restore and maintain an Australian landscape fit for purpose, then we'll start to sing on the same sheet of music. Because then you say, right, what are the key components of the landscape? Soil, water, biota, minerals. How do you work them? They've got to be worked together. Okay, if they're so important, you then say perhaps they've got to be declared as national natural strategic assets. National natural strategic assets. Lifted up there. Managed accordingly as strategic assets, managed in an integrated way. And if that then becomes policy, then things start to happen. And then you say, well, who's managing most of the landscape? It's the farmers and grazers, including the indigenous people in that definition. So what if they're managing most of it? Then perhaps we've got to be supporting them. And I mentioned that earlier in paying them a fair price for their food and rewarding them for looking after the landscape. Then you say, right, how do the farmers get supported? We've got to get 23 million urban Australians reconnected with rural Australia. That's got to be a policy driver, not something where you have one day a year, Farmers' Day or Soil Day. It's got to be a policy driver of a continuum of reconnecting urban Australia with its rural roots. Quickest way to do that nationally, as I said, is to put a garden in every school, and I've explained that. And the final bit of the national policy, if I might troubles, would be to refocus science, to do the stock take of our knowledge base, get the deficiencies, and then retask science accordingly. So that fixes the policy. Fixing the paddock, I hope to achieve, or some part, by the development of case studies. I've got 21 of them at the moment under a Soils for Life program. It's on the web, www.soilsforlife.org. And what I want to do is to roll it out in partnership with the unis, ag colleges, government departments, CSIRO, farming organisations. I want to roll it out to 100. And I want this 100 to be 100 of the best practice farmers, graziers, permaculture people we've got in the country, the best practice. And then I want to be able to measure what they're doing to their soils, good and bad, and measure the outcomes. And I want this to be on a permanent basis so that it's still going in 1,000 years' time. And in 1,000 years' time we might understand something about how our soils and agriculture and so on works. So that's what I'm hoping to achieve there. And tomorrow there'll be an article in the Weekend Australian, the first that's coming from the Soil Advocate. There'll be about 10 of them every 3 weeks. And it's going to mention that. And what I expect from each of you is a letter to the Australian saying, what a damn good idea, let's support the Soil Advocate. So you all do that, well done. So that's the fixing the paddock, fixing the policy.
Seems to me that's a pretty big ask. My reading of history is that agriculture goes through what I call around about a 1,000-year cycle, and we're in the fourth recorded one of those now. And agriculture's been going for about 8,000 years, and generally we've left a desert in our footprints wherever we've been. And the cycle that I see now is that we have around about 100 years or so of subsistence farming, which morphs into the family farm, which morphs into corporate agriculture and absentee ownership, and then the environment collapses sometime around 300 years after we get going. We go through another 700 years where not a lot happens and the environment starts to recover again, and away we go again. And right now, where you can actually see where agriculture in Australia is right now, we're on the cusp between the family farm and corporate agriculture, and more absentee ownership. And I get around Australia a fair bit, and I believe that if you took a chequebook around Australia now, you'd probably buy 80% of Australia's family farms, because the family farms have just had enough. So it's a really big challenge. What odds do you give it that you can really pull this stuff together, and in what sort of time frame do you think we'd be looking to get that vision of yours underway and get some legs under it?
Well, I think your prognosis in terms of the history of agriculture and the history of civilisations is absolutely right. Most civilisations have risen and fallen in the way that they've handled agriculture. And if you look at the Fertile Crescent, on Mesopotamia, Egypt, etc., that were flourishing landscapes, they're now aridified and desertified. It probably took them 400, the Romans took 1,000 years before they grew their agriculture. The agriculture provided the resources for navies or armies in those days, and then later navies and so on, and universities, etc. But then in the process we aridified the landscapes and desertified them, and they collapsed. You've got the seven pyramids, and you've got all these old historic civilization buildings in Syria and Libya and all those places. I think in Western society we've probably done more damage in 100 years than those societies did in 1,000. Part of it's been the population increase, but the population increase has also been because we can produce more food, or we thought we could, and other things, better health, etc. But the reason why I have taken it on at my silly old age, and as a simple soldier, is because I've got 10 grandchildren, and they're aged between 3 and 17, and I am absolutely, really worried about what the planet is going to look like when they're 25 or 30, particularly when it comes to soil and water. And what really, really annoys me is in this country, and to a degree overseas, we all the time seem to be dealing with fifth order issues. And the community's not yet jacked off enough to really stand up and say, hey, it's time we got on to the big ones. And soil and water and food is the biggest of the lot. There are 4, I think, what do they call them? 4 horsemen of the apocalypse that are right just over the horizon. The first will be the spin-off from the global financial crisis. Nobody knows where that'll go. The second is going to be fundamentalism, nasty people that are running around cutting throats and trying to impose their silly ideas on the world. They won't succeed, but they'll cause a lot of problem and heartache and expense in doing it. The third, which has not yet hit the public arena, is the food-water crisis. And the fourth, which is either just behind all of that or just in front of it, I think is climate change, or climate variability, if you want to be politically correct in this country. But it's there because you have to, I think as I've done, accept the views of every top scientist in the world. the President of the United States, the Chairman of the World Bank, the Secretary General of the United Nations, the US Armed Forces Chiefs of Staff, the Prime Minister of England, you name it, the Pope. They're all saying the same thing. Are we saying that they're idiots? They've got access to the very best advice. And they're trying to give some leadership that we've got to do something about it, because the risks of not doing something about it are too great, because eventually you probably reach a tipping point where you can't make the changes. So it makes sense to try and do something about that climate change arena. The best way of doing that is to look after the soil and get as much greenstone on every square inch of this country, including in the cities, on the tops of buildings, on the sides of roads, in the car park. As much greenstone growing to do the job, that the forests and so on did in yesteryear. Now, am I confident that we're going to wake up in time? Well, I have great confidence in the fundamental common sense of the Australian public. But we've got to light the fire and to get the Australian public really thinking about it instead of footy and a beer and barbecue and, isn't it sad, we lost the Ashes and the rugby and so on. We've got to get people really thinking about these impacts and the whole issue of soil, water and food production, and looking after our landscapes, looking after our farmers. And a lot will depend on the youngsters, the kids of this age that are dealing with it tonight. But what I don't want to see happen is in 20 years' time, my grandchildren saying when I passed on, Papa knew all this was happening and he did nothing about it. That's what I don't want to see happen, and that's why I've taken it on as a grey old soldier and grandfather, I guess.
I can certainly equate with that. You've got 6 more grandkids than I've got, and I know that mine are very young and they'll still be around in 2090, and I have exactly the same concerns. And Paul Gilder, in his very good book, The Great Disruption, says that humans are very slow but not stupid, and eventually, when we get right to the brink, we'll actually wake up and do something. And I guess tonight we're in a high school and we've got some youth here and listening to those young people tonight, and the future is in great hands when you see the quality of these young people and their enthusiasm and their understanding of some of these issues at their age. Our generation I call the locust generation, because we've consumed everything in front of us and there's not a lot left for our grandchildren. And so I think if you've got any last words or advice for some of these young people and anything else you'd like to see, how they can get into this fray.
Well, the first thing I think as Australians we are generally optimists. Now, I painted a pretty sorrowful picture there purely to get people thinking, because there are huge problems in China, India, Africa, Middle East. The rising populations, the lack of water, the soil degradation. China, 16% of its agricultural land poisoned, not degraded, poisoned through mineral treatment of minerals and so on. Every major river, not just polluted, but a number of them poisoned and no fish. Damming the headwaters in Tibet so the Mekong's not going to flow correctly down through Laos and Cambodia and so on. So there are big issues. But to the youngsters, what I want to say is that we have the answers. That's the silly thing. We've got the answers. And what we've got to throw away is political prejudice, an inability to discuss things openly and listen to the other person's point of view, getting onto the media with due respect to be more informed and better and more sympathetic at conveying different points of view and then leaving it to the public to make up their minds once those points of view have been articulated accurately by the media. So the media has a huge role in this too. But we have the answers. I think we've got the time if we grab the ball and run with it. And I guess one of the reasons why I'm here tonight is to encourage you all to grab the ball and run with it and do your little bit, whether it's in your own backyard garden, whether it's supporting your school garden, whether it's getting to your local government councils and demanding that in their planning of urban areas and cities that they really take cognizance of water recycling, greening everything, organic materials for construction, etc., etc. All of us can play a role, and all of us have to, because in my view, if you eat, you're involved. And the other quote I'll give you tonight is to save the planet, we must save the soil.
But that's been a great wide-ranging discussion, and for an old soldier I'd say you've got a great grasp of a lot of the environmental issues, not only in Australia but worldwide. And thank you very, very much for your time, and I want to thank the organisers and everyone for pulling this together, and thank you for giving both of us an opportunity to get up here and spread a bit of the word.
Thank you very much for that.
Dr. McCosker and Major General, is it okay to have some questions from the audience?
Yes, absolutely.
Okay.
Fire away, because you'll need a speaker because I'm pretty deaf.
Good evening. First of all, thank you very much for the really intelligent information that I, as a teacher at Corinda State High School, will be using on Monday. I am currently teaching geography, I'm teaching food security, I also teach economics, and that's where my question is going to come in. I've learned a lot tonight about how we should all get together as a country. You said it was very important, all the participants, all the stakeholders get together, have some knowledge, work together. My concern though is the growing perception that much of Australia's arable land is being bought out by other countries and foreign governments for their own food security. And I'm just thinking that if the federal government doesn't either tell people it's not happening or they put in some legislation to minimise this, then all the goodwill, the national will to do something about soil could be lost. I'd love a response. Thank you.
You go first and I'll go second if you like.
It's a good question because it expresses, I think, a genuine fear that many Australians have. But let me predicate my remarks by saying that Australia has always required overseas investment to make this country tick. Mining, agriculture, the lot. And generally mentally, I guess, we thought, well, if it's British money or US money, it's all right. Then we've come to learn to accept Japanese investment, then Korean investment. Now we're into others, Chinese and Middle East investment. And it is really about the word investment, how that money is used. And when it comes up to buying land, be it home units in Sydney or Brisbane, or farms in Australia, as a first principle, I'd say it should always be leasehold, so that we've always got control, or 51% ownership. That's the first principle. If it's looking after agricultural landscapes, then I think we've got to lay down very clear directions about how that landscape will be managed. We're not going to tell them to grow carrots or wheat. This is a market thing, what they want to do. But what we must ensure is that whoever's doing it, whether it's Australian or Chinese or whoever, that they're managing the landscape so that it remains sustainable, the soil remains healthy and the landscape remains sustainable. Now, I just don't have the knowledge about what we do about that at the present time, but I suspect we've got to do a jolly sight more. And what's more, we've got to do a lot more with the mining companies, because though they're restoring the hole in the ground, which generally is a very small bit of dirt when you look at the size of the continent of Australia, it's the huge leases they have around that mine, which in my view we should be asking the mining companies to manage as a soil enhancement enrichment process as part of the mining deal. So not only do you have to look after what you're doing and digging into the ground and how you restore that landscape after, but if you can use intensive cell grazing, etc., around 2 million hectares of mining operations up there in the Pilbara or northern Queensland or wherever, then it makes sense to do so. And that's another way in which we can increase our exports and improve the general soil health of our landscape.
I'll bring it down a little bit closer. In the last week I've been on 2 aggregations put together by international organisations. One of those is Danish and one of those is Middle East. And I can tell you that all of those are buying up land that has been severely damaged by Australian graziers and farmers, and they're putting millions into fixing it up. They're tidying up, they're buying land from people in their 80s who haven't done anything to it for 20 and 30 years, where the fences are falling down, the equipment's fallen down and broken down, the houses are fallen down. They're renewing all of that, and they're training Australians, putting a lot of investment into Australians. They're all run by Australians. And I've been involved in agriculture for 48 years and a lot of that time in the Northern Territory. And I've seen all of these things come and go. When I first went to the Territory, it was half owned by the Poms. Then the Yanks moved in. Then the Indonesians and Malaysians moved in. And then who came in after that? I think the Poms are back in again. But all of those things just rotate, and I've never seen any of them take the land home. And I believe that if you're really concerned about what's leaving Australia, you ought to be more concerned about the Apples and the Googles and so on of the world that are not paying their share of tax in this country. But every one of those organisations that I've seen have put more in than the people they bought the land from. And believe me, there's a lot of bad farmers in Australia, people who are degrading our resources, and I don't mind just if some of these organisations come in and they look after it the way Michael suggested. If they came in and abused it, I'd be very, very upset. And I think there's a great misconception about the Chinese. The Chinese are essentially tyre kickers. There's a lot of noise about the Chinese, but very, very, very little action. And because I'm heavily involved in the land area right across Australia, and so ANZ did a study about 3 years ago that indicated that agriculture in Australia needed about $600 billion worth of investment for us to stay competitive. And our farmers can't afford that. In rural Australia, our debt levels have gone from 12 billion in 1992 to 65 billion in 2012, which is 20 years. And income, farm income, gross farm income across Australia didn't change in that time. And our benchmarking data shows, for example, that in the grazing industry in Queensland, for 12 of the last 13 years, the average grazier in Queensland has spent more money than they've earned. And the only way they've been able to keep going is borrow more money, or work off farm, or their wives work off farm. And so our farmers, a lot of them are in desperate straits. There is very little money in agriculture generally, and certainly broadacre agriculture. There's a group of people in the top 10 to 20% of agriculture in most industries that actually do quite well. So I actually feel there's a misconception about foreign ownership of Australian land. And right now, it's well under 10%. And always has been. And it's probably less than it was historically 100 years ago and 50 years ago.
A few years ago, I had the pleasure of meeting President of China, who's in town, and the Chairman of the Communist Party and the Premier of China. And they all gave me the same message independently, that China had enough internal problems of its own without wanting to create external problems. And one of the things they were absolutely paranoid about was getting guaranteed sources of supply, whether it was in fuels or whether it was energy or whether it was in food and so on. And what they're looking to is long-term agreements, and I'm part of a group called the ASA 100, which Quickie Forrest set up a few months ago, which the Australia-Sino Agricultural 100, and it's there to try and get an agreement, agricultural agreements between China and Australia for the next 100 years. And my job as the sort of advocate in that 100 grouping is to push the fundamental basis that we've all got to look after the soil. Otherwise you can talk about infrastructure and marketing and everything else to your heart's content, but if the soils continue to degrade, you'll have nothing to buy or to export. So I think that's been accepted, and we'll see how we go.
Michael, I'd like to congratulate you on the coverage you've given this evening. I've been involved in giving a number of lectures to community groups on food security. I've been amazed at how many people are really concerned in the urban community about this sort of issue. The point you make about complexity and need for people to talk to each other is very relevant. And from a point of the audience tonight with students, I wonder whether you've got some views on education in this regard, because I perceive that a lot of young people these days are looking at doing something that's easy to get a degree, don't do something that may be more challenging, that does require a lot of integration of ideas. Clearly, in dealing with the issues you've been talking about tonight, you need people that can bring together a whole lot of different ideas, so education plays potentially an important point in this. I was wondering whether you could comment upon how it relates to students being educated so they can actually deal with some of these issues.
One of the things that's encouraged me, and I think you practice it here, and the principal was talking about earlier on, was getting that school programs now have an agricultural component, a syllabus. I hope that is now becoming nationwide, and that there's a progression to it in terms of its degree of detail, difficulty and so on. I think that's very important. As we mentioned, the school gardens, that's another adjunct to that. But again, I think it was Gillian saying to me earlier on that I think kids in looking at agriculture or looking at ag science or soil and water should realise that they don't all have to go back on the land to be farmers. There are so many different offshoots that relate to soil and water and plants. But what was the question on medical science? How much comes from the soil or the biota? There's huge things to be done in terms of water, of cleanliness, purification, how we're going to get it, recycle it and so on. And of course there's a whole host of things to be done on plants, whether it's forestry or looking what plants will produce in terms of yield of different foodstuffs, medical things and so on. So I think having a real focus of informed education right through the syllabus, and I know how crowded the syllabi are, is very important indeed. And indeed I've spoken to the chairman, I think, of the the Curriculum Implementation Council, or what's that effect, to see what he's doing with his team about bringing a continuity of agricultural education through the syllabi right across the natural curriculum. So I think all that's got to be done, but it's very important too that kids can see a future in agriculture, Who's going to take on ag science, etc., if they see the farmers going broke and unhappy and all that sort of deal? It takes a pretty brave kid to do that. So that gets back to the rewarding of the farmers fairly for their product, gets back to rewarding farmers for what they do to the landscape, so that they're having good lives and productive lives, and that encourages youngsters to go onto the land, or encourages to take up ag science so they become part of the extension services, etc. Does that answer the question that you asked, or was there some other connotation to it that I missed? I couldn't quite hear, I couldn't quite get the...
I guess the thing I'm a bit concerned about is a lot of my friends, as young people friends, are interested in doing subjects which are really quite easy to pass examinations, rather than in fact doing the challenges of understanding something about chemistry, physics, biology, those sort of subjects which are fundamental when you're dealing with agricultural science and soil science.
Well, I guess that's got to be something that the teaching profession and parents have to address. I mean, parents got to play a real role in this, and I agree. I think we've probably lacked, in the last 20 years or so, sufficient kids coming through science, maths, engineering, etc. Everybody wants to do law and business management and so on and so forth. There's nothing wrong with that, but it seems to me that we do have to put a much more priority focus on the scientific disciplines, and that's where it comes from. It comes from parents and it comes from teachers, but you've got to be able to sell it to the kids in an interesting way so that they're stimulated enough to do it. Interesting enough, I found in the school gardens, and I visited a number of them, the difference it makes to, say, a 13-year-old boy or a 13-year-old girl when they first get that beaker of wet soil from the school garden under a light and a microscope and see the big bugs eating the little bugs. That seems to switch something in the mind. Gee, there's something in this. And then when the maths teacher says, right, Harry, we need to get topsoil to cover the size of this stage 4 to that depth, how much do we need? And suddenly Harry realises that maths are important because he's got to be measure length by breadth or depth to do it. And then the art teacher brings the kids down to draw the cauliflower or the rose bush or something. The poetry teacher brings the kids down to do poetry in the garden on trees or willows or Wordsworth or what have you. So there are all sorts of things that can be taught from the school garden to excite children to look at the soil from a whole range of different perspectives. Not a good answer to your question, but the best I can do.
Thanks so much for your talk tonight, Terry and Michael. You keep talking about paying farmers a fair price for their food. It has to be a quick answer because Gillian's got to get on a plane. So in a quick way, what's your plan on giving farmers a fair return for the produce and the fibre that they grow?
Well, I don't have a plan. I think it's you whiz kids have got to sort that out. What I'm outlining is a philosophy that it's only fair that the community pays whatever is a fair price to a farmer. Now, how is the price of product worked out? Does a buyer go down and tell the farmer what he's going to pay for the ton of carrots or the bushel of wheat? I don't really know. Do Coles and Woolworths do the same thing and driving prices down as low as they can so that they can stand up and say that producing the lowest price for the consumer? The danger about that, if it's done